Hello there. We are now getting a peek through the keyhole of what our new future has in store for us, and it's not that pleasant. Now, the first thing I want to point out is that there are some positive noises coming out of the Russia-Ukraine peace negotiations, with the head of the Ukrainian delegation, David Arakhamia, saying that the Russians had verbally, and I repeat, verbally, accepted most of Ukraine's proposals, with one main sticking point being that of the status of Crimea. But the mood music was that this could lead to a meeting between Putin and Zelensky in the near future to thrash out the final details. But given the continued attacks by Russian forces on Odessa, it does seem a bit too soon to say it's all coming to an end. And Vladimir Medinsky, the head of the Russian delegation, has said that a Putin-Zelensky meet is not on the cards quite yet. But I'm wondering where such a meeting would be held. Surely the venue would have to involve a face-to-face meet on neutral territory. Not Russia, not Ukraine, not Belarus, not a NATO country, and surely not Zoom or Microsoft Teams. And would you trust Putin if he insisted it be held in Moscow, for example? How safe would Zelensky be in Russia right now? We've already seen what happened, or allegedly happened, to Abramovich. And would Putin now dare leave Russia? He could find himself out of a job as soon as his plane left Russian airspace and a temporary president appointed in his place to oversee the transition. Then find that his jet has been diverted to The Hague for a war crimes trial where he's the chief suspect. Or would his mode of transport be a legitimate target for someone, perhaps? No, I'm not sure that Putin would ever leave Russia now. The risks to him of doing that are growing by the day, especially if the reports of what his soldiers have been up to on the ground in Ukraine are true. And even if Ukraine and Russia agreed terms, how long would that really last? Also consider that it looks like Zelensky will come out of this as a national hero. Putin will want to be seen by Russians as their national hero. How could he do that if he's agreed to Ukraine's terms? I hope I'm wrong, but I think this conflict has a way to go yet, especially if the US wants it to keep going. But even if there is a peace accord in the near future, our government has said it wants to keep the sanctions pressure on, although the likes of Germany, France and Italy might have other ideas. Anyway, just 6 weeks into this nasty Russia-Ukraine war, and it's already becoming obvious that this is the final nail in the coffin that will severely damage or even wipe out the finances of most UK families. And with the suspicion that the US administration wants to keep this conflict alive for as long as possible so as to bleed Putin's Russia dry, it could mean that this cost of living crisis has only just started to scratch the surface, and it will soon start gouging deep, very deep. And what we'll see over the coming weeks and months is more heart-wrenching stories of the financial suffering of families, the elderly and the vulnerable. But in the background there will also be gut-wrenching stories from the heart of Ukraine, along the lines of the horrors we found out about this morning, of what some Russian troops have allegedly been up to. And also the stories of how the Ukrainian civilian population has been taking its revenge on their invaders in the form of spiked food and drink, with some pretty nasty outcomes. And if the Western aim is to bleed Putin dry, then the establishment will need the support of the UK population to keep sending money, aid and arms to Ukraine, as well as warmly welcoming so many of the displaced into this country. So expect those stories coming out of Ukraine to become more lurid the longer the conflict goes on, in order to keep our attention and sympathy levels high. But we now live in a country of high employment, where just about anyone who wants a job can get one, but where many may soon not earn enough money to be able to commute to that job, let alone pay for housing, heating and food. And if this continues for any length of time, we might be heading for a tsunami of credit card, loan and mortgage defaults. And how about council tax arrears? And of course, only the taxman and the BBC can quickly get to court to take your money. But due to population displacement, the population of the UK is expanding rapidly right now, just as it is across the Western world, and that places huge strains on economies. Just ask Poland, the country that is probably bearing the brunt of all of this. But while our elderly and vulnerable face an extremely bleak future, certain hotels will be able to increase their daily rates to cover rising costs in the sure knowledge that the government will pick up the tab. It will have to pay, or else see the hotels close down and their residents, some now long-term, having nowhere to live and nothing to eat. The courts will visit many things on their own population, but they will not allow those hotels to close, however much it costs. Now, if we are to do this, then the last thing we should be doing is transferring the pain and misery from one set of people onto another set of people via tax and an unaffordable cost of living crisis. We have to ensure that those of our citizens that truly need help do get that help, including those that do take in Ukrainian families. They will probably need more than what's already on offer to survive. And now to the future. We should already be assuming that some of those that end up here in the UK will, once they've sampled the delights of what the UK has to offer, they will decide that their future lies here. And I say decide because no one will ever force them to leave, and the courts would put paid to any attempt to do so anyway. So for a start, we are going to need a lot more housing than we planned for, even as late as last year, and a lot more infrastructure like power stations and waterworks to service them. Either that, or commandeer housing stock and redistribute the largest homes to families. These families can't live in hotels and second bedrooms forever. Now, we as a collective always end up voting for the same old parties in the UK, something that is set and will never change, and the policies of those parties will never change. And with the mass population growth route down which previous, present and yes, future governments are set on taking this country, we need to set aside those policies built around ego-fueled politicians leaving a legacy behind them, and just divert the money and effort into building houses and infrastructure to meet the population growth requirements of those parties that we end up voting into office at every election. So we need to put back net zero by at least 25 years, scrap the likes of HS2, and just build homes for the population growth our politicians that we vote for want to see. Or have more people on the streets as the hotels fill up. Because the way things are going, that's all we're going to be able to afford to do, build houses, even though the UK taxpayer will have to be squeezed ever harder as time goes on. Or do you really think it's all somehow going to be back to normal in a couple of months' time?